What is up, guys? Today on the Footballguys Dynasty Football Show, we're going to be diving into Dynasty stashes, kind of talking about guys who have more of a value next season and kind of giving you guys a head start on your league mates. This is the time to start diving in, especially as we get closer to the playoffs. You kind of understand where your team is at. So who are some guys you can give a little bit of head stash? I will say last year when we were talking about this, when we definitely did on the YouTube channel, we talked about Khalil Shakir, who should be probably the wide receiver 2 for the Bills. Jerome Ford was mentioned, like those type of guys who are going to pop off and be those next guys for your dynasty teams. So we're going to start here. We're going to go through a ton of players, but we're first up is D'Ernest Johnson. This is Jeff Bell's guy. He writes about him. He loves D'Ernest Johnson. He's talked about him being in Jacksonville, what we've seen from him. So what do we think about him from a dynasty standpoint, Jeff?
D'Ernest is interesting because I think the biggest thing on him right now is I'm not sure that people have caught on that Tank Bigsby has really been eliminated as the backup running back for Travis Etienne, and especially in dynasty mindset. And Tank Bigsby is certainly talented enough that he could end up back in that position again, but he had a fumble right before Jacksonville's bye. Coming out of that, it's really been D'Ernest Johnson as the backup running back. Yeah. Last week, or the other day, we just saw the biggest performance out of that. He had about 60 yards. He's averaged about 50 yards from scrimmage every week over the last 3 weeks. And so I think now we're probably getting to the point where people are catching on that he is the backup that you want to add. But I did a video just this week talking about deep dynasty waiver ads, and his sleeper rostership percentage in deep dynasty leagues is around 30%. So that tells you right now he's probably available in one of the leagues that you might be in, that you can go out there and add a backup running back. And that's pretty rare when you look at deep dynasty leagues that you can make these moves. But really what we're going to get into tonight, some of the stashes are players like D'Ernest Johnson, who might be available in your deep leagues, who could help you this year, or players that, again, like, Kevin talked about Khalil Shakur, like Ty Chandler would have been one of those guys last year, and we're seeing him start to emerge. Looking at, especially towards free agency, players who can create roles. And a lot of it is when you step into a stash, especially in dynasty during the free agency period, we see these micro bursts of value where a player doesn't even have to get on the field. People decide he's going to be the starter because who else could be the starter? And then you are able to flip these guys that you can add for free right now, use them to build up draft capital, use them to move around your rookie picks, or kind of hold them and hope that you've got something.
Yeah, we've spoken about the reactionary nature of Dynasty, and this is where I think it can benefit a lot of Dynasty managers because as, the hive mind or, a collective groupthink of sorts kind of comes to a consensus on a player and we might talk about one of those players. I don't necessarily think that D'Ernest Johnson is going to get into that area because I do think there's still Tank Bigsby believers. You're looking at one right now. I still think Tank Bigsby can be something, moving forward. But like Jeff said, when you have an opportunity to add an RB2 at this late in the game, especially in Dynasty, you have to take advantage of that. I think, God forbid Travis Etienne gets hurt down the stretch, but you could be walking into some legitimate production towards the end of the year here. So D'Ernest Johnson was the one. He had that 42-yard catch that was really, really nice, like Jeff mentioned, but 7 carries the last 2 weeks, 5 touches the week before, 8 total the last couple. That's not insignificant. So D'Ernest Johnson, always been a good football player too. Every time he gets an opportunity, he does a good job with it. And so I think that's a good call for sure.
Yeah, and Johnson's a perfect guy on either side. If you're contending, grab him because he's going to help you down the stretch if we see injuries, or hey, he's that running back 2 volume. And then if you're not, you could ship him, move him. If he's available in almost 70% of your leagues, as you get closer here, if there is a big injury, you might be able to get Johnson for what, $5 or $10 on waiver wire, and then flip him for maybe a first or a second, whatever. And that's, there's no sunk cost there. It's total return on invested. And you're like, hey, I grab him. That's what we're trying to do here, trying to give you guys ideas of like, hey, who are some guys out there for both sides, and just try to make it actionable for you as we get into it. But before we move on to more players, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Comment below with your questions, trades, or thoughts on any topic. Also, make sure to head to footballguys.com plans to become a premium subscriber. Elite subscribers that get custom Dynasty content for less than $15 monthly or $70 annually. We have the best Dynasty content in the fantasy football industry. Join today. We just struggle with ad reads. That's really the only thing that we struggle with here on the show. And it's not really we, it's Jeff, but it's okay. We're partners in this. We love him to death. Let's move on to my guy, Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver out of Dallas. He is slowly kind of coming off pretty good games consecutively. He caught 2 or 3 targets for 49 yards in the game against Commanders. I call it a game, but it wasn't really a game. But they played out there. One team was playing. And when you look at it, Dak Prescott's playing as a top 5 quarterback right now. This offense is really clicking. He's kind of taking like Michael Gallup's role. He's pushing for that number 3 spot on there. I mean, even like a few weeks ago, Michael Gallup was quoted that Tolbert is going to take my job, which come on, Gallup. We need more from you there after all the seconds I've given up for you the last 3 years. But yeah, I think Tolbert has shown that in an offense that you like to see there, he's caught at least 2 passes in 4 straight games, 18 targets over that stretch. He's kind of pushed Gallup a little bit. He's only had 11 targets on Gallup's side. So we have seen that. And moving forward, he's a fun one to project moving forward as well, because Dallas could kind of really utilize him as their 3rd wide receiver. Is that kind of how you're looking at Tolbert, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that Michael Gallup got that big contract a couple of years ago, got injured right around then, and we really haven't seen the player that earned that contract. He's got an out in his contract that the Cowboys are able to get out of the last couple of years of that deal. And I think that coming into this year, they weren't really certain about if Michael Gallup would be able to deliver or if it was going to be they made the move to bring in Brandon Cooks. And I think that when you look at the salary structure of the Cowboys with the deal that CeeDee Lamb is going to require, it's impossible almost to keep both Brandon Cooks and Gallup long term. So they're going to have to naturally transition out there. And so I think that they've already made those steps to get Michael Gallup or to get Jalen Tolbert comfortable serving in that 3rd wide receiver role. He's playing those snaps and he really can grow a lot in this game developmentally. He was a very buzzy name in Dynasty last year coming into the season as a rookie, and he really fell flat. And so this is a player that was probably dropped in a lot of your leagues as you go through the year, as you get into your rookie drafts and have to clear space for the next crop of rookies. And he hasn't really had that big breakout fantasy performance. And so one of the things that you try to look for these indicators, who's playing but hasn't really put the numbers up yet, because that's where you can really buy for cheap, buy into opportunity, and buy a player that can grow value as he kind of continues on the season. He's in a great position too, because as the Cowboys play into the playoffs, he is going to get spotlight games potentially. And so this is a situation you add Jalen Tolbert for free right now. Maybe he goes off in a playoff game and you're sitting there and people realize, okay, well, Michael Gallup's done here. And so Tolbert's going to be that guy. And again, we're looking for players that are going to accrue value, ideally even not playing, but in spotlight games are a great position there.
I think it's also worth noting that Brandon Cooks is 30 years old. His contract, they might look to get out of that. He's been good for them this year. I think he's still got some juice, but the wheels fall off pretty quickly on older receivers. So there's a chance that I don't think the Cowboys are the team to go in with Jalen Tolbert as their 2 ever in a year. But I also think that should they choose to move on from both Gallup and Cooks, and they maybe fill that role with a rookie, we could see Tolbert have a more prominent role as that rookie kind of figures things out. Now, is that likely? Maybe not, but Tolbert hitting and being a fantasy wide receiver 1 or 2 even probably isn't either. Like Jeff's saying, like Kevin is saying as well, we're looking for value bumps. So grab him now, find the time to get out. I think that could be this offseason when they do move on from Gallup, because I think you're going to have some people that get excited about Tolbert's outlook. Especially he's a talented player. I think there were things about his game that were very raw. He was certainly a good contested catch player, but I think some of the nuance to the game took a minute. And sometimes you have players like that. He's been good this year. He's been exciting to watch too.
I mean, G5 guy going to NFL is going to take some time. I think that's the biggest thing when you look at some of these wide receivers. I hate giving up on guys also, like right out of the way. Like, I think that there's nuance to that too. Like, you need to understand kind of situation. The other point about contracts, they're going to have to pay CeeDee Lamb, and that's going to eat up some cap. They're paying Dak as well. I think they're still eating Zeke's contract a little bit out there. Like it's still there. So there could be really an avenue for Tolbert at a necessity being that wide receiver 2/3. Maybe if they believe in him and the Cowboys. As a Cowboy fan, historically, we believe in our guys way too much. So what'll happen is our front office will be like, oh yeah, Tolbert can be a wide receiver too. And that's just how it goes. Like consistently, that's how Dallas management, who's not changing, looks at these guys. That's how we get, we ship off Amari Cooper for a fifth. That's historically what has happened. Like, and that's just the reality. And if there's no veterans out there they can get for cheap, like Cooks, those guys, Tolbert could be rolling in there. So I think that's a really good call there. Next guy, Zamir White. This is Christian's guy. So Zamir White still hanging around, 24. I know, when we're thinking of like overall from just can he kind of step in and be a guy? Like, Josh Jacobs, he's out. I think he's out of the Raiders, in terms of what they're, new coaching staff, everything there. He's going to be looking out there. Zamir White's there right now, 18 attempts this year, 46 yards. Nothing really like to be like, oh my gosh, stand out to you. This is more of an opportunity thing. I think the hesitation I have with Zamir is new coaching staff comes in, possibly. I don't know what they're going to do with their head coaching position. Where does that go? Because I always try to steer away from unknown kind of areas with coaching staff and what are they going to use him like. So I'm kind of a little bit out on Zamir, but what is your argument? What would be your argument, Christian? Where are you at with Zamir?
Josh Jacobs might not be there next year, and a rebuilding team might not want to invest in the running back position right away, right? So fair. I think you could look at potential opportunity for an increased role should they choose to not bring Jacobs back. Now, I think it's worth noting that Antonio Pierce is like, if I had to guess, I think he's probably going to be hired. Although they have already, maybe the Raiders have kind of shown that they don't care about success when you're an interim head coach, though, with Rich Bisaccia. But
they're cheap too, and they might just bring him back because they're cheap.
That's true. Well, they have to be cheap because all the buyouts on all the coaches that they've fired. But yeah, I kind of think that if Pierce comes back, that lends itself less to Zamir White being featured just based on his lack of usage since Josh McDaniels got fired. But you never know. This is one of those ones where if you have an open roster spot, obviously don't drop someone that you could use down the stretch for a Zamir White type player. But I think if he's available out there, it's worth stashing at this point.
Yeah, and some of these players are available in your waivers, and some of them are not. So Zamir White is probably going to be rostered in many deep leagues. But the thing with Zamir White is, one, he saw so much hype this past offseason and then didn't deliver on any of it. And we've seen there can be some pretty violent reactions in the dynasty and fantasy community in those types of situations where basically if I decide in my mind that you're going to be great and then you don't do anything, I'm completely done with you. And so the thing with Zamir White is kind of change the eye line on Zamir. Don't try to go acquire Zamir White. But if you're doing a bigger trade, you slide Zamir White into that package, and that the person is thinking about the top level eye line, and they're not thinking about Zamir White being in that deal. Then if you get into a situation where Josh Jacobs is no longer on the team, suddenly you accrue a lot of value. So Kyren Williams was this type of player last year where Kyren Williams, Cam Akers breakout was happening. And so everybody was thinking about Cam Akers. They weren't thinking about the rookie that was hardly playing, although Kyren Williams was playing a little bit last year. And so then you come into this year and all of a sudden Kyren Williams is the breakout guy. And so I was able to do multiple deals at this time last year where I wasn't going out to acquire Kyren Williams, but I was making sure that Kyren Williams was part of the package that I was acquiring.
Yeah, I get it. I get it with that. Like, I understand that. I have a hard time because where my grades were for Zamir and Kyren are really different in terms of like where I had them coming out. And so I don't know. I do think that there's value there. I think you guys make great points. And I think the rebuilding thing is a good point too. Understanding that like this team's probably gonna be like, we'll just throw out Zamir for this year and just see how it goes. And then like maybe get a veteran. Plug in a veteran that, is going to get cheap and we will just bring him in. This next one's interesting. I really like this one because I think, Tyler Huntley, Baltimore quarterback, when we talk about like quarterbacks in Superflex leagues and Dynasty, like they're hard to come by. And really what we're looking for here is like a Geno Smith route. hey, not very good, didn't show something. Oh, wait, gets an opportunity. He's an unrestricted free agent. I know he was kind of sought after when you're looking at what he did. He was quarterback 14 in fantasy in 2021 after week 11. He was a Pro Bowler in 2022, whatever that means in the NFL. We don't care. We put it down on the sheet. So 2022 Pro Bowler out there. And now he's unrestricted. And there's a lot of quarterback needy teams. And we've seen guys bounce around a little bit. And had somewhat success in fantasy. Like I think the best example Geno is definitely up there. Baker Mayfield bounced back this year, and he's looked pretty good for fantasy perspective. Serviceable, thinking quarterback to accrue value because Baker's been going for late first, seconds, and 2 years ago, trying to get that out of the Baker Mayfield or even last year was impossible. So I think that's what we're looking at with Huntley there. What's the avenue? Because his rushing upside is there too. So we're thinking Konami Code has that ability too. I think the case would be made, like, do we think he could be a starter? So do you think a team out there is going to be like, hey, yeah, we can start him? Jeff, what do you think about that? Do you think there's a team out there in mind that you have in mind, or just maybe that he can find his role?
I think the best avenue, probably, I would be surprised if somebody really went the Geno Smith route with him and kind of said he's going to be our guy. He was very, very buzzy coming off the 2021 season in NFL circles. And I know that there was a lot of pressure around teams that kind of wanted to go out and grab him. And the Ravens valued him pretty highly, kept him around. Now, looking forward, I think the path would be a team that decides maybe we're going to sign him in free agency. We intend to draft a rookie, and we're going to have him kind of as that bridge guy that maybe we start him the first couple of weeks. As you start to kind of, it's like the Andy Dalton path or like the Ryan Fitzpatrick path, where he has played as a starter at a reasonably high level in the past. And so when you look around the league, I mean, you've got Tim Boyle starting games right now, and you're seeing Josh Dobbs as the breakout out of nowhere candidate for the second half of this year. And there's no reason that Tyler Huntley can't be that type of player, of a Josh Dobbs type player that either is the plan 1B for a team that is unsure about the rookie that they might start, or in Dobbs' instance, maybe an injury happens or something to that extent. But out of free agency, if he goes into free agency, you get a 2-month runway where a team could decide, we want him to be our 1B, but we're going to sign him in free agency, and he's going to sit on top of that depth chart. And so whenever anybody goes to that team page, sees that depth chart, they see Tyler Huntley sitting at number 1 right now. And while they might know they're going to draft a rookie, sometimes that doesn't always translate. You see the screenshots on Twitter of, this is what the depth chart looks like right now. And so that's what the type of scenario you're looking at with Tyler Huntley right now.
I think you can also make the case like Dearness Johnson, where, I mean, I think the broadcast on Sunday Night Football last week mentioned that Lamar Jackson has gotten to week 12 quite a bit, and he's always looked pretty good through week 12. And then that's when the durability starts to pop up. Now, I think Lamar Jackson's style of play, it has changed in a massive, massive way to where I think he's probably going to stay healthy this year. But if Tyler Huntley is available, this is the moment to go grab your handcuff quarterbacks as well. We're not going to mention many of them, but Huntley's the one that I think you can plug in and play each week. I grabbed Jake Browning, not really a stash at this point, but like guys like that too, where you might want to just stash them for this season and hope that, something like what we just talked about also happens. But yeah, I think you could even accrue value before this season ends potentially. So.
And a lot of this stuff, like Tyler's a throw-in, man. Like you have a deal going on and you don't have a dynasty deadline, trade deadline because you play in smart leagues. And like, hey, give me this and then Huntley. And then like, it's just like, oh yeah, we'll get this done. Like a lot of these guys can just be that added piece. And that's what I like about it, is like, it's costing you probably nothing to get a lot of these guys. And then, yeah, you can have those little micro markets. I think that's important to know too. And like he talked about with the durability stuff, we might see Huntley spot in. And then now, even if he does it just for one game, there is a micro market for that kind of value because it's so reactionary. I don't think people talk about that enough. I think we make Dynasty way too hard. And I think people out there are making it way, way too hard. Like these theories and all this stuff. No, players get seen in like the island games. Oh, that guy's good. I'm going to go trade for him. That's Dynasty reality, what we have. Like Huntley could have that. Those games he comes in and, hey, he could be a starter. All right, then you move him or you add him now before then. Like, I think that we make this game way, way too hard. It's not that hard. It's not rocket scientists. You don't need to be like posting theories on social media for 4 or 5 straight days. Like, that's not just very micro market. Hey, this is what it is. This is that player. The next one I love this stash in terms of just value wise. Israel Abanikanda from the New York Jets. When they released Michael Carter, I think that was the big one. It showed that, like, hey, he could possibly get that role. Dalvin Cook is an unrestricted free agent. I really like Izzy. From a scouting perspective, I know me and Christian from a scouting wise, just last year talking about him. Like, I know we were higher on him. I do understand that he has some deficiencies, maybe in athleticism and some of those things, but he can run the football. If he gets volume, he could definitely get you fantasy points. And if Brees is the only other running back on this roster, with a carry, I really feel like Izzy can kind of step up and be that guy for them if he got injured or whatever happens with Brees, especially after Dalvin leaves. Like, there's going to be a role for Izzy. They have him on a fun contract. It's not going to cost him anything. This is a perfect guy to grab. This is the running back. Like, okay, I highlighted this guy because their draft capital. You know what the Jets need? Offense and defensive linemen. And definitely offensive linemen. Like, they're going to have to go address a lot of those holes. They're not going to be able to address the running back position. So I really think that Izzy's a great call there. Jeff, I know you I think you put him on the sheet if I had to guess. But, what did you think about Izzy?
One of the things, Robert Saleh had a comment this past weekend talking about how Breece Hall is really just trying to hit home runs every single play. And I think that Abanikanda might be able to slide in there as a power type complement to Breece Hall, because it seems like they're a little bit frustrated about Breece Hall kind of getting behind the sticks a little bit. And as the team starts to fall out of the playoff race, I know that Aaron Rodgers is going to come back apparently and break every medical record at 40 years old for a team that is currently, I think, 4-7 right now. But as they start to fall out of the playoff race, I think that they're naturally would give Abanikanda looks relative to giving Dalvin Cook looks down the stretch. And so that's kind of, you have got the head coach subtly dropping hints that they're a little bit frustrated in the way that their star running back is playing. You've got one young running back on that roster other than Breece Hall, who could be that complimentary back. And so that's the biggest thing with Abanikanda. And again, you're going to have people that are, they might have used a rookie pick on him and they're not ready to give it up now. But this is another player that might change that eye line, because I think in most people's minds, they're thinking, well, Breece Hall is the stud running back there. Then they also have Dalvin Cook, who that's a name that I know. And then Abanikanda is just kind of lingering under the radar.
Do this now, because when they released Michael Carter, it was very specified that it was to get Izzy some more looks. That didn't come to fruition. He didn't get a touch last week. The game plan really didn't lend itself to that, or the game script, I guess. That being said, when the Jets are in football games, I do anticipate that down this very specific stretch of football, we are going to see this. I don't think you're going to have this opportunity to go get Abanikanda for very long. So if he's still out there, this is the time to do it. As you're listening to this, open up your fantasy football app and add him right now if you have open space, because I do think, like Kevin said, this is the guy that he could be part of a really good committee next year. He could be an AJ Dillon to Breece Hall's Aaron Jones when we think of what Aaron Rodgers can lead, because Aaron Rodgers is there next year, and so this is going to be an explosive offense. Yeah. I like Abanikanda. I thought there were some things to his game. He doesn't have a ton of wiggle. Sometimes that doesn't matter. Just one cut and go, and I think he's good at that. And he's got some speed. So I think they could use him in specific ways. But yeah. They mentioned the tough yards. He's more fit to do that than Breece Hall is, despite, I think Breece might weigh more than him, but sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes it's just running style. Abanikanda can do that. I think this is the time. Go get him.
Izzy and Breece are very good compliments to each other. Like, the way I look at both these guys, they're very good compliments, and they fit NFL systems, what they like to see there. And yeah, very smart move there. All right, we want to get through as many of these as we can, so we'll go a little bit of rapid fire. Elijah Dotson, Los Angeles Chargers running back. Eckler, Kelly, unrestricted free agents. Dotson, undrafted free agent. He made the 53-man roster. He is active ahead of Isaiah Spiller. So, pour one out for Isaiah Spiller stands. Like, just didn't come to fruition on him. Jeff, you like Dotson? You think he's worth it? He's probably free pretty much
Yeah,
free.
yeah, he's probably free. He's really an Austin Eckler comp. Very similar body builds. They're both from very small Colorado colleges. I mean, you just kind of look at the way that teams build their teams, and you can easily see the gears turning in the Chargers' minds of like, this guy could be our next Eckler. And so that is the biggest thing there. You mentioned the free agent situation facing Austin Eckler and facing Josh Kelly. I assume they would probably try to keep Eckler around, but I know there was some frustrations from him this past year about contract situation and those types of things, and they would probably look to address the position in the draft. But again, they've used draft resources the last couple of years, reasonably high draft resources on the running back position, and to not great success.
All right, next guy. All right, so why don't you, Christian, pick a couple guys that we have on here that you wanted to kind of mention.
A.T. Perry, Saints wide receiver. We'll jump down a little bit. This is one where you kind of have to look ahead. And A.T. Perry, there was a little bit of buzz for him over the last, couple weeks with some of those injuries in that room. I think he's had 3 catches over the last 3 weeks. One was for a touchdown. I think that turned some heads. It was a really nice catch in that one game. And that was kind of the first look at A.T. Perry that we got this season. But Michael Thomas is aging out. Chris Olave has been in and out of the lineup. I think obviously he's their wide receiver 1. Rashid Shaheed is going to be a free agent next year. Keith Kirkwood, who got to run this last week when Shaheed went down, is also going to be a free agent. And so A.T. Perry was one of those guys I liked pre-draft. I thought I was a little shocked at how far he fell in the draft, but he's the type of wide receiver that, should they choose to stick with Derek Carr, which I think is probably pretty likely at this point. I think that team is competitive enough with him. I think Perry is the type of receiver that he likes to work with. And so he could start to get some opportunities down the stretch here. I know Shaheed left the game. I think he's hurt. I don't know his status, if I'm being honest, but I know he left.
Slight tweak. He's supposed to maybe miss a week or two. Olave had a concussion that he's questionable if he's going to play next week.
Right. So this could be, once again, one of those like last opportunities. He might not be available for very long. This might be a hot waiver ad. You might have to drop a little more, fab on him than you would some of these other guys. But I think there's some long-term opportunity for A.T. Perry.
Jeff, where are you going?
Andrei Iosivas, I think is I probably said that wrong. Iosivas, I think is maybe the right way to say it.
The first time. Now you just sound like you didn't say it right. So go with the first one.
Yeah, Andrei Iosivas at the Bengals wide receiver. We're seeing T. Higgins obviously has the contract situation that before the season, the Bengals said we're not going to negotiate with T. What that means, I don't know if they're going to tag him. I don't know if they just didn't want to do it at that time of year where they were going to look later to do that. And Tyler Boyd is free agent as well. And so that opens up a situation where there's going to be a lot of flux. I think that as you look at the Bengals, as that Joe Burrow contract kicks in, as Jamar Chase has a contract looming, whether they decide to keep Higgins, whether they decide to go cheaper, I don't know what they're going to do, but that is a player that has played well in limited opportunities this year. And it's kind of a perfect scenario for acquiring him, because with Jake Browning now at quarterback, that volume, that ceiling is so low on that offense that you almost not expect a real breakout towards the back half of this year. So you can go out and acquire him because he has shown that athleticism shows up on the NFL field. That situation can be there, that he can accrue a lot of value.
Yeah, I like that call. I'm going to go over with Trey Palmer from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I like that guy. And I like the fact that when you look at him, he's earned 43 targets this season, and he's been consistently okay. Coming out of Nebraska, obviously the LSU, if you don't know about him, didn't play a lot. Nebraska, he did well. But you know what? He's shown, he earned 7-6 targets this year. And I think the fact with Mike Evans' contract and what that looks like, when you're looking at like when they can restructure it, there's a lot of unknowns about what Mike Evans is going to be. He signed that 5-year deal in 2018, just looking at it overall. What does that look like? What are they going to end up doing, in terms of that? Godwin has looked okay, but Godwin, consistently has not really done much. And when you're looking at it from that perspective, like that's a problem, I think, for this offense. And you know what? Trey Palmer can be the wide receiver 3. He can slip right in there and be that guy. I like K-Dot and I like these other guys, but I think Palmer is an interesting one. I think that if they do, I don't know what they're going to do with the quarterback. They're in a weird spot. They're in a tweener spot there, but there is some fantasy points to be had. And the fact that like, of the guys on this list that we've mentioned, I mean, he's got to be up there in terms of targets earned, probably the most targets out of these guys. I mean, I know Tolbert's coming on a little bit, but I just think that he's still getting slept on out there by dynasty managers, and he's a good ad as well.
I have a bit of a hot take on that wide receiver room. I think they re-sign Mike Evans with the money that they save by trading Chris Godwin, and Trey Palmer becomes their wide receiver 2.
Okay.
I think Mike Evans has been far and away the better player this year still. And, he's been the better receiver his whole career. But I think him sustaining that through this period, he's looked good with Baker Mayfield. That's kind of hard to do. We do know that as a fact. So I think that could be the route that they go. I also think they're kind of in range. If they tank out here, they're kind of in range for a Drake May push or a Caleb Williams push, in the fact that they might not go 1-2 overall. So that could be exciting. Trey Palmer with one of those two guys, I'm super into that.
Well, and I think Mike Evans too, there's a level of face of the franchise with him that I don't think Godwin ever has really gotten to. That's one of those guys that he's going to be a Ring of Honor type player for the Bucs.
Yeah. All right. Other guys that we put on here that we're not going to be able to talk about, but Emmanuel Wilson, Green Bay running back, A.J. Dillon's unrestricted free agent, could be worth it, especially in that offense where they don't have a ton of money to throw around. Darius Davis, Chargers wide receiver. Yeah. Quentin Johnson might not be very good. There's a lot of question marks there. If Darius can come in and kind of have that area. Chris Rodriguez Jr. from Commanders, I think that's a smash. If the coaching staff was coming back and it doesn't look like the coach, I don't know what's going on with Bieniemy. If Bieniemy is the coach, I think you're excited to have Chris Rodriguez, but it's a risk, especially with Antonio Gibson being a free agent. And then Stone Smart, Chargers tight end. That's a Jeff Bell special. I don't know who the hell Stone Smart is. I'll be honest with you guys.
He's a converted wide receiver. He scored a touchdown 2 weeks ago when Gerald Everett was out, and so Gerald Everett is going to be a free agent. That's a guy that the coaching staff might not be the coaching staff, but college converted receiver. Those are always kind of raise your eyebrows when you've got a tight end that is kind of that skill set.
Yeah, that's why we have Jeff on here. He's a smart one.
Yeah. All right. The full version of every show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're enjoying the show, head over to your favorite podcast app, search up the Footballguys Dynasty Football Show. Leave a review if you so feel inclined. But if not, just make sure you download the episode, listen, subscribe, do all the fun things over on the podcast app. We'll be talking about some prospects here shortly, some trades, the Dynasty Roundup, lots more to get into on this episode's Head Over There.